Imagine this. You're standing at a pristine harbor on the southern coast of Sri Lanka. Palm trees, blue water, not a ship in sight. Behind you, a massive concrete port complex. Cranes frozen in place, warehouses echoing with nothing but wind. It looks impressive, expensive, empty. And that's when you realize something chilling. This port didn't fail by accident. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't COVID alone. It was the final move in a geopolitical chess match where Sri Lanka didn't even realize it was playing. Because in April 2022, Sri Lanka, the country that once bragged about universal health care, high literacy, and middle income status, defaulted on $51 billion in foreign debt. Hospitals ran out of fuel. Buses stopped running. People cooked meals over firewood in the capital city. Inflation exploded. Governments collapsed. And everyone asked the same lazy question. How did this happen so fast? But that's the wrong question. The right question is, what was the fatal bet that made collapse inevitable? Today, we're doing the full autopsy. Not the sanitized IMF version. Not the Twitter geopolitics version. The real story. Numbers, names, incentives, and consequences. This is the verdict. Here's the headline number that should make you sit up straight. By 2022, Sri Lanka owed $51 billion in external debt, about 60% of its GDP, according to the Sri Lankan Ministry of Finance and the IMF. But debt alone doesn't kill a country. Japan has debt over 250% of its GDP. The US runs trillion-dollar deficits like it's a hobby. What kills a country is the wrong kind of debt, borrowed for the wrong projects, in the wrong currency, with no exit plan. Sri Lanka made one core bet, that it could borrow its way into geopolitical relevance, that infrastructure could replace exports, that prestige projects could substitute productivity, that being useful to great powers was safer than being boring. Think of Sri Lanka's economy like a household. Instead of fixing the plumbing or learning a new skill, it took out massive foreign loans to build a luxury driveway, hoping rich guests would eventually show up. They didn't. And once the interest payments came due, the trap snapped shut. We're going to dissect this collapse through 7 fatal moves, each one rational on paper, disastrous in reality. And by the end, I'll show you why this isn't just Sri Lanka's story. It's a warning label for every developing country flirting with easy money and big promises. Let's start with the original sin. Sri Lanka didn't just borrow a lot. It borrowed in foreign currencies, mostly US dollars. That means every loan repayment depended on earning dollars through exports, tourism, or remittances. According to the IMF, by 2021, over 70% of Sri Lankan government debt was denominated in foreign currency. That's like taking out a mortgage in Swiss francs while earning your salary in rupees. Sounds fine, until your currency weakens. And oh boy, did it weaken. Between 2012 and 2022, the Sri Lankan rupee lost over 80% of its value against the US dollar. Every dollar of debt became more expensive overnight. Interest payments ballooned. Reserves evaporated. Refinancing became impossible. If you think I'm exaggerating, consider this. By early 2022, Sri Lanka had less than $2 billion in foreign exchange reserves, according to Reuters, while facing over $7 billion in debt repayments due that year alone. That's not a squeeze. That's a mathematical death sentence. And the government knew it. So, instead of stopping, they doubled down. Sri Lankan leaders fell in love with concrete. Highways, airports, ports, conference centers, big, visible projects that scream development and photograph beautifully from a drone. Between 2009 and 2019, Sri Lanka spent tens of billions of dollars on infrastructure, much of it funded by external borrowing, according to the World Bank. The crown jewel? Hambantota Port, a deep-water port built in the hometown of then-President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Cost? About $1.3 billion. Financed largely by Chinese loans at commercial rates. Traffic? Laughably low. In some years, fewer than 50 ships docked there. For context, Singapore handles over 130,000 ships annually. Hambantota was a five-star airport with no flights. And when the loans came due, Sri Lanka couldn't pay. So in 2017, it did something unprecedented. It leased the port to a Chinese state-owned company for 99 years in exchange for $1.12 billion. Money that went straight into paying off other debts, not building the economy. That wasn't investment. That was selling the family silver to cover the credit card bill. And here's the kicker. The port didn't even generate enough revenue to service its own debt. It was never about economics. It was about geopolitics. Hambantota sits near one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. About 80% of global maritime oil trade passes nearby, according to maritime studies. On a map, it looks invaluable. On a balance sheet, it bleeds money. Sri Lanka assumed that because the port had strategic value, someone, eventually, would make it profitable. That's not how finance works. Strategic assets are valuable to states, not to cash-strapped governments needing dollars today. China understood this perfectly. The port wasn't about immediate profits. It was about long-term leverage, logistics, and optionality. Sri Lanka needed cash. China got control. And before you rush to scream debt-trap diplomacy, let's be precise. Sri Lanka didn't force Sri Lanka to borrow. Sri Lanka asked. But once you're desperate, the terms are no longer yours. That's the trap. Not coercion, but asymmetry. Now here's where the collapse accelerates. Sri Lanka had two major sources of foreign currency: tourism, remittances from overseas workers. Tourism alone accounted for 12% of GDP and brought in more than $4 billion annually before 2020, according to the Sri Lankan Tourism Development Authority. Then, COVID hit. Between 2020 and 2021, tourism revenue collapsed by 83%. 83. Imagine losing your job and 83% of your income overnight while your mortgage payments stay the same. But wait, it gets worse. In 2021, the government banned chemical fertilizer imports overnight, attempting a rapid shift to organic farming. Crop yields collapsed. Rice production fell by over 20%. Tea exports, Sri Lanka's crown export, plunged, costing hundreds of millions in lost revenue, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization. So, at the exact moment Sri Lanka needed dollars, it destroyed its own dollar-generating engines. You cannot make this up. With dollars gone and debt payments looming, the government chose the oldest trick in the book: print money. Between 2020 and 2022, Sri Lanka's money supply increased by over 40%, according to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. The result? Inflation exploded. By mid-2022, inflation exceeded 50%. Food inflation crossed 80%. Wages didn't keep up. Savings evaporated. The middle class was wiped out. This wasn't abstract. Hospitals ran out of fuel. Ambulances stopped responding. Schools closed because buses couldn't run. Reuters reported patients dying because dialysis machines had no electricity. This is what monetary collapse looks like in real life. Not charts, empty shelves. Here's the most tragic part. Everyone saw it coming. Credit rating agencies downgraded Sri Lanka repeatedly between 2019 and 2021. The IMF warned the debt was unsustainable. Economists begged for early restructuring. Instead, the government burned through reserves trying to appear strong. By the time Sri Lanka officially defaulted in April 2022, the cupboard was bare. The default wasn't a shock. It was an admission. The moment the music stopped. And when default happens, everything breaks at once. Currency collapses. Imports stop. Social order frays. Protests erupted. The president fled the country. The prime minister resigned. This wasn't just economic failure. It was systemic. In March 2023, the IMF approved a $2.9 billion bailout. Cue the headlines. Sri Lanka saved. No. Stabilized? Maybe. Saved? Not even close. IMF bailouts come with conditions: tax hikes, spending cuts, structural reforms. Necessary medicine, but brutal. The irony, The bailout money largely goes to repaying creditors, not rebuilding lives. The average Sri Lankan pays the price for decisions made decades earlier. And the geopolitical chessboard remains unchanged. China holds the port, bondholders demand repayment, the IMF enforces discipline. Sri Lanka lost agency long before it lost solvency. So, let's strip away the noise. Sri Lanka didn't collapse because of one bad loan, or one port, or one virus. It collapsed because it made a single fatal bet that debt-funded prestige could substitute for economic fundamentals, that geopolitics could replace productivity, that growth could be engineered from the top down, financed from abroad, and paid for later. Later arrived, and it came with interest. The verdict. Here's the bill. $51 billion in foreign debt defaulted. Millions pushed into poverty. A generation of savings wiped out. Strategic assets leased for nearly a century. National policy dictated by external creditors. And the human cost? Empty classrooms, dark hospitals, young people leaving the country in droves. This wasn't destiny, it was design. Bad incentives, short-term thinking, and the quiet arrogance of believing the bill would never come due. If you think this can't happen elsewhere, oh, you sweet summer child. If you found this breakdown useful, you already know what to do. Hit the button the algorithm worships. It helps this channel keep doing forensic autopsies instead of fluffy headlines. And comment below. Simple question. Was Sri Lanka unlucky or irresponsible? Next episode, how Pakistan walked the same debt tightrope and slipped. Because this story, it's not over.